from my psychological view of how things work. When someone has harmed us, it's necessary that we go to primary feelings. I'm going to explain what this means. We have two types of feelings, secondary feelings and primary feelings. So when something happens, we either go to, and the two feelings are hurt or anger. Hurt and sadness or anger. So I want you to think. When something happens to you, what do you go to first? Do you go to hurt and sadness, or do you go to anger? How many of you go to hurt and sadness first? How many of you go to anger first? All right. Now, let me tell you, that's secondary emotion. Primary emotion is the feeling that is under that is right under that secondary emotion. It is more basic to us, and it's the real feeling of what's going on. So this is what I'm going to propose to you. If you're the kind of person who goes to sadness and hurt first, underlying that sadness and hurt is going to be your anger. If you're the kind of person who goes to anger first, underlying your anger will be your sadness and your hurt. I go to anger very quickly. I can go to anger very, very quickly. I don't go to sadness or hurt very easily. I was with Phil and Mary Hangan one night, and we were talking about something that was pretty serious to me. And Phil looked at me and said, "Mary, how are you doing?" And the immediate response for me was, I can tell you how I responded, and I can tell you how I felt. My response was, "I'm fine. I'm really doing okay with everything. It's really okay." The feeling was, "Oh my God, I'm so sad." But I was not about ready to admit to that sadness. That's very hard. So, what I am saying to you is that we need to look at those primary feelings, and we have to get down to that level when we go to forgiveness. So, if the kind of person said before, where your primary emotion is going to be anger, you've got to experience that anger. If your primary emotion is hurt, you've got to experience that hurt. And what we want to do when we deal with forgiveness is to eliminate those painful feelings. We don't want to go there. And I honestly don't have an easier way for you to address these issues. The thing is that you've got to go to those primary feelings. It is only through allowing ourselves to experience our feelings that we can eventually be able to go from denial or resentment to forgiveness. So what I'm postulating is that we're not going to get there. We're not going to get to forgiveness until we get to that basic sense of what are we actually feeling. And I want to tell you something. This is a society that deals with a lot of denial. I would tell you that most people who come into therapy, if I'm going to have two groups, the hurt and sadness group versus the anger group, you know which group comes to see me more? The sadness, the hurt group, not the anger group. In acknowledging our anger, what we're saying is, how could you have done this injustice to me? I didn't deserve this. Or in acknowledging the hurt or the sadness, we're saying, how could you have made me so sad? How could you have hurt me in that way? You had no right to do this to me. See, I call this a sense of justice. So when I eventually have a client who eventually can say to themselves and to me, and I'm not ever saying you have got to absolutely go confront the other person. I'm saying they have to admit to themselves, how could you have hurt me so badly? What did you do to me? That is the righteous anger. In acknowledging these primary feelings, we're addressing, again, the injustice of the abuse. When we do this, this leads to an act of empowerment. That is the one, see, I have nice feelings about anger until I tend to overdo it sometimes. But the issue with anger is that it empowers us sometimes. Hurt doesn't always empower us. Anger will empower us. So sometimes that's where we have to go. We need to approach the other person with our hurts, our angers, and our resentments. How many of us have lived with undiscussed resentments to find out that we may have really misunderstood the other person's behavior and intent? So that story I tell you about my husband. I was going to make a mess of things because I made an assumption about his behavior, and I was wrong. We need to understand what actually happened. What was the intent? We often we have often devised a scenario in our own minds that is not reality. How many of us do that? I'm sure all of you can think of how many times we have we come up with a scenario. I am sure that's what this person meant. I am sure that's what they intended. And then we find out there's no more truth to that than anything. And we all tend to do that. We need to put ourselves in the other person's place. If I were in their place, what would I have responded to the situation? Would I have done it the same way they did? And the more I understand the other, the more capable I am of loving him or her. Now let's talk about that. That's empathy. When we attempt to empathize with that person we need to forgive, what we're saying is, boy, when that happened, what would I have done if I were in their place? How would I have responded? If I had their hurt, if I had their damage, how would I have responded? So we go, after we get to experiencing our feelings, then we go to, I wonder what they were experiencing. I wonder what they're all about. What we cannot do is go to them first and say, well, they did some harm to me. Now, they were damaged, so I'm imagining that was hard for them, so I need to forgive them. Now, the work has to be first. I have to acknowledge the hurt, I have to acknowledge the anger, then I can go to empathy. We may attempt reconciliation. Reconciliation is choosing not only to forgive, but to take a step further and begin to trust the other person again. Trust means that we're not apprehensive that they have the capability of hurting us again. They now are able to keep their word. So that's what the trust means. We are safe and secure in this relationship. Let me tell you a little bit about safety and security. We all look for safety and security, but I'm going to tell you, do you know what I would define as the definition of a good relationship, a good marriage, a good partnership? One in which each person feels the other person has their back.
That's one.
A healthy relationship is one in which each person feels that the other person's has their back, is there to protect them. Okay? That's a healthy relationship. We had a couple of days ago, and I said to her, do you feel safe and secure in this relationship? And she said, yes, I do. Good. I said to him, do you feel safe and secure? He looks at me, and you can tell the guy's scared out of his mind. And he says, really meekly, no, I don't. He was so frightened that she was going to come down on him. Well, it's not good enough that one feels safe and secure. Both people need to feel that. Reconciliation involves another person. It takes only one person to forgive, but it takes two to reconcile. But because of the toxic nature sometimes in certain relationships, we can choose to forgive but not reconcile. In some cases, this is the wiser thing to do. What I am saying, there are relationships out there that are toxic. They are difficult. They may harm us too much. They take too much from us. Relationships that drain us. We can forgive that person, but that doesn't necessarily mean I don't believe we're called. I don't think we're called to really have to be with them. I think we have a duty to ourselves to protect ourselves, and there are toxic relationships out there. Toxicity in a relationship can be caused by abusive, repeatedly dishonest, and manipulative behavior, and there are people out there who are highly manipulative, and you know you're going to get hurt if you stay involved in that relationship. Where the other is unable to keep promises, are simply not capable of loving us as we deserve to be loved. However, the choice not to reconcile does not preclude the ability to eventually forget. In other words, these are not oppositions. You can still forgive and perhaps not reconcile. We need to determine our need for an apology in the reconciliation process. when we want an apology, what do we really want from them? Do we want them just to say, I'm sorry? What do we want?
Acknowledgement.
What is it?
Acknowledgement. Validation.
Acknowledgement, is that what you said? Yeah. Oftentimes we want an acknowledgement that they understand the hurt that they did to us. Sometimes they can do it and sometimes they can't. Sometimes they don't get it. Can we continue this effort to forgive even if the other one never understands our experience? So how do we forgive when there is no reconciliation or no understanding of our hurt? In order to do this, we must get back to our most basic emotions again, whether it is anger or sadness. After we have allowed ourselves to feel the most basic emotion, only then can we move on. However, this can take time. Change, and again, you're listening to my philosophy of psychology. Change comes about when we replace one emotion with another emotion. Oftentimes, this is not a conscious decision. So think about it. Can you will yourself to forgive another person and feel forgiveness? We can say the words, but can you will it? Now, what has to happen is you have to replace that, whatever those feelings are, with another emotion. And then that other emotion replacing it with is forgiveness. In this situation, we're replacing that hurt and anger with love. So what happens is, what I need to do then is to see you with different eyes. I need to experience you in a different way. This is not a rational decision. We cannot will ourselves to forgive another person. The only way we can do this is through compassion. Again, an example of that for me was, for 5 years of my life, I taught 6th grade in a Catholic school. And 12 and 12-year-olds are a little, they can be really pushed. I really came to a point where I really loved teaching that grade level. But every year I'd have a couple of kids who I'd look and think, and I have a belief that you can't teach unless you actually care about the child. Children don't learn unless they feel cared about. I really believe that. So I always felt that as a teacher, it was my job to love that child. But if I'm going to be honest with myself, I can't go to each child and say, I love you, I love you, I love you, and not feel those feelings. So I knew I had to feel the feelings. So I said, invariably, I had a couple of kids that I really didn't like. Just to aggravate me, irritate me. And unfortunately, those of you who know me pretty well will know that my irritation shows. And it's just not very nice, it's not very good. But anyway, so I had a kid in my class who was just aggravating me. So I was coming out of counseling 101, and we were supposed to make a log of it. If we're in a classroom and we have a child that's disruptive, make a log every 10 minutes of this child's behavior. So I did. So every 10 minutes I would jot down what I saw of this child's behavior. You know what happened at the end of the hour? The kid didn't doing anything. He was fine. So I would have all second. He didn't do anything. So I began to really look at that, and when I started looking at him more closely, I realized it wasn't his issue, it was my issue. Once I could see that he wasn't doing anything, it was really so much easier to like this kid. After that, I really did, truly, I could say, I loved this child after that. So in seeing that, that you have to, sometimes we have to put people in a position, we have to put them in a position where we can learn to love them. So that's what I'm talking about when we change one emotion to another emotion. And it said the only way that we can do that sometimes is through compassion. So let's talk a little bit about compassion. We will do anything to avoid painful feelings. One of the ways that we remove ourselves from our painful feelings is by directing them at another person or directing anger or resentment to ourselves. So what I'm gonna say to you is that oftentimes our lack of compassion comes directly to ourselves. We are not very compassionate with ourselves. We can experience compassion only when we let go of our stories of blame. Then we can allow ourselves to feel the fear within ourselves. So when we let go of those stories of blaming others, oftentimes we will find that that's where our fear is. In fact, I'll tell you what I have found for myself, and I don't know how many of you experience this. What I have found that is when I experience quick, intense anger, I can almost guarantee you that it's coming out of fear. My anger comes out of fear. Only then can we begin to regard ourselves. Once we realize that fear within us, only then can we start to regard ourselves with compassion. Our fear helps us realize that we need to be compassionate with ourselves. We can experience compassion only when we stop living in reaction to past events and cease to identify ourselves as an angry person or a betrayed person or a bad person. We are then free to meet the present moment with wisdom and kindness. Whether we are angry with ourselves or others, we forgive by letting go of blame and opening to the pain that we have tried to push away. This is the essence of forgiveness. There needs to be a loosening of our heart. There needs to be a loosening of our hard heart. Resistance keeps us stuck in this hardness. So therefore, by saying, I forgive you, or I forgive myself, a warmth and a softness is created that allows emotions to unfold and change. I've said this now over and over tonight. We can't will ourselves to feel those feelings of forgiveness. Forgiving is a product not of effort, but of openness. It's being open